quick little thing before we actually start the episode here. I've made a decision to start including reference pictures for certain things when I talk about Pokemon and what they're based on. If it's something that's not immediately obvious, I'll throw in a picture just to tell you, to show you what the hell I'm talking about. So, like in the last time, you probably know what a crocodile is, so I don't need to show what one of those looks like. But things like the Echidna and the Tenrec and the Endive, maybe not as commonly known. So here's some pictures of those. And I'm going to just start doing that from now on. And that's about it. Last time on Pokemon Crystal, we got the 3 starters and not much else. This time I'm going to be catching a crap ton of Pokemon and basically inserting my little review things for them. So right now in game it's not quite 6 o'clock, it's about 5:30, 5:40, so I have a few daytime exclusives I'd like to actually catch now while I can. And then I'm basically just gonna insert these wherever I can. Also, I did not mean to KO that, I'm not paying attention. But yeah, there's a few daytime exclusives. The game is going to roll over to nighttime at 6, so I need to make sure to get these while I have the opportunity, and we'll figure out pacing later. I do like how Rattata is showing up now, because I attempted to record this once already, and I actually wanted to catch Rattata fairly early on because of the way that I recorded these. They had a certain order. Oh well, it'll make more sense later. So, since I'm going to get this one, let's just go ahead and cut to that, and I'll be back in a while. Rattata, or Rattata, as I usually mispronounce it, and will probably continue to pronounce it just because it sounds more natural to me, is one of only 2 Pokemon that can appear on Route 1 in the original games, and definitely the less popular of the 2. And it's also cemented itself as being a bit of a pest that shows up in a lot of games in the future. It's certainly not in every national dex, but the games that it does appear in, it usually makes its presence known and shows up all over the place. No more so than in Johto, where it kind of sticks around longer than anybody really wants it to. So this is the first of the early Route Normal type, or just Route 1 Rodent, as some people call them. A trend that just has stuck around for whatever reason. It had its purpose. In the original games, it was put there as just a sample of the local wildlife, a fairly generic Pokemon that you can catch early on to add to your team. If you like it, then you can keep it, but if you find something better later on, which you most likely will, then you can box it, and it will have served its purpose, but it'll eventually get replaced. It also serves as decent cannon fodder when trainers use them, usually youngsters and other just young trainers starting out. It's not used very often by anybody with any kind of competence. It is seen in the hands of Team Rocket a few times, but again, not really by anyone with any kind of competence. Rattata itself, in terms of attacking power or just use in battle, is most infamous for the Fear strategy. Basically, where you take a level 1 Rattata and give it a moveset where it is holding a Focus Sash, which allows it to survive any hit that would instantly kill it. And then, surviving with its 1 HP, it then uses Endeavor to reduce the opponent to 1 HP, and then you use Quick Attack on the next turn in order to finish them off. It's a surprisingly good strategy for something so stupid, but it can be countered pretty easily, because if you send out a level 1 Rattata against somebody who has ever heard of this strategy before, they can easily get rid of it by just not attacking it directly. They can just switch Pokemon to a ghost type that can't be hit with Quick Attack or something. They could poison it, they could do a number of things, but if you've never heard of it, it's easy to catch somebody off guard with this. As for its design, there's really not a whole lot to say about it. It's just a rat. It's a lot more vicious looking than normal rats. It's obviously a more cartoony, mean looking one. And I do appreciate that they made it purple. It makes it stand out a little bit more. It could have just very easily been brown or gray. A lot of Gen 1 Pokemon are. This one at least stands out slightly with the color palette. And its evolution loses that, but that's another story. And really, there's not much else to say. It never really had much of an impact on me, and I certainly never wanted to use one throughout a game. There's been other Route 1 rodents that I have actually used, not very many of them, but they're usually more interesting than Rattata. Its one real claim to fame is the move Super Fang, which reduces the opponent to 50% of their HP in a single attack, which is pretty useful. That move has ended up becoming available by other stuff later on, though, so it kind of lost that specialty. And now it's pretty much there to fill the Pokedex, to be beaten when trainers use it. And if you really want to give it a shot, go ahead, but there's definitely better stuff out there. As for its name, obviously it has rat in there, but it's also basically rat attack, just with the K at the end taken off. The prototype name that it had, according to early material, was actually rat attack, but then they shortened it. It could also just be rat-a-tat, the sound that a machine gun makes, but I kind of doubt that. And the Japanese name is Ko-Rata, Ko meaning child, and Rata just being Raticate's name, so it's fairly literal, just meaning that it's the child of its evolution. Very odd, they usually don't name Pokemon like that. Pidgey is the first normal and flying type in the National Dex, and is often the first flying type that you'll encounter in many games. In the originals, it was one of only 2 Pokemon that could appear on Route 1, and in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, it's one of a handful that appear on the first route in that game. So it's very likely that a lot of players will end up picking one up during their travels through the first route, or the next few routes after that. And it actually ends up being on a lot of people's teams because of that. Sometimes just due to familiarity and the ease of picking one up, sometimes due to not knowing any better, but nonetheless, I've seen a lot of people go through the entire game with a Pidgeot in their Elite Four team. And unfortunately, the Pidgey family is not all that good. Pretty much all the other normal flying types that become available later on, not even counting other types of flying types, do sort of outclass it, but we'll get more into that when I talk about the evolutions. As for Pidgey itself, it's fairly basic and inoffensive. It's just a little bird. The name would have you think that it's a pigeon, but it really doesn't look anything like one. Bulbapedia says that the bird that it most closely resembles is either going to be the cedar waxwing or a house sparrow, and the evolutions also resemble an osprey, so it could just be a baby osprey. But it's not just the English name that makes it sound like a pigeon, it's pretty much all of its translations and the original Japanese as well. The Japanese name for it is Popo, which is their onomatopoeia for what a pigeon sounds like. I always found it weird how different cultures come up with different sounds that animals make, like how in English we say meow, but in Japan they say nya. It's just different ways of interpreting it. But that also means that Popo is basically Hoodoo, because that's what I call pigeons, because that's what it sounds like they're saying to me, but they're going with that, so they might as well just call it Hoodoo. And interesting fact about the name Popo, or bit of trivia rather, when Heart Gold and Soul Silver first came out, or first leaked rather, and Cerebi was putting up some information about the game on his page, he actually listed that Faulkner was using a Hoot Hoot on his team instead of a Pidgey, and this got a lot of people excited because it meant that they were kind of changing things up and giving the gym leader's teams more representative of Johto and not just using a whole bunch of the older Pokemon. And the reason he did that was because of a source that listed the Pokemon he used in Japanese, and both Pidgey, being Popo, and Hoot Hoot, whose name is basically the same in Japanese, are just the same syllable repeated twice. And because the Japanese language is based off of syllables, he didn't really pay attention to what character was being used, just saw the same thing repeated twice and was like, oh, it's Hoot Hoot, and then listed that, but it unfortunately was wrong. And I believe that's about it for Pidgey. Like I said, it's just kind of a stand-in for an early, it's an early bird. It doesn't really need to be anything else. It could be one of several different birds, but as far as I'm concerned, it's just a bird. It's fairly cute. It's a little pudgy bird, but it's a bird. Sentret is our early route normal type for Gen 2, and I'm hoping that this one ends up in the video later than the one I did for Rattata, because I recorded that one first, and this one is very much a counterpoint to that one, because whereas Rattata is extremely common, mostly, especially in Johto, it shows up all over the place, and it can appear at any time of day. Sentret, its equivalent, is really only available at the very beginning of the game, and only in the morning and day, not at night. So depending on when you play through the game, and get through the early part of it, you very well could not even encounter one of these, and therefore its one role of showing up on your team at the beginning of the game and then being dumped later has basically been lost, and it serves just sort of to pad out the Pokedex. It's unfortunate because it does have a cute design, but it is definitely one of the less usable of the earlier out normal types, which are already not known for their greatness to begin with. It's kind of difficult to even say what it's supposed to be based on. Also, well, first of all, let's look at its name, Sentret. It's based off of Sentry and Ferret. Sentry because it stands up on its tail to basically look out over its surroundings and spot danger, which is something that meerkats are known for, not so much ferrets. And its Japanese name is Otachi, which is a combination of O, which means tail, and Itachi, which means weasel. Could also be Tatsu for stand. So it's basically just sort of a generic mustelid is the term for it, just any kind of animal that fits into like the weasel, ferret, otter type of category, just sort of like a long mammal. Some people also claim that it looks like a flying squirrel. It sort of does, but it never actually is seen flying, so I don't think that's entirely what they were going for. It seems to just sort of be accepted that sort of it's a mishmash of various small mammals. But if it resembles anything, it's, I guess, a ferret or a weasel, but it's still also kind of a meerkat. I don't really know what it is. But, like I said, it's never really had much of an impact on me. I'll catch one when it shows up just for completion, but I've never felt the desire to use one. I just looked over its moveset, and it doesn't really get anything too outstanding. Rattata at least gets Super Fang, and even Hyper Fang, although it doesn't have any like secondary effects. It's still a pretty decent normal type attack. Sentret doesn't really have that, so unfortunately it is just sort of one of those Pokemon that is remembered for being in the first two generations, and that's about it. Hoppip is a grass and flying type, and is one of the first flying types introduced to not specifically be a bird or some other kind of winged creature. Not the first, but there weren't very many of those in the early generations. And I feel like if this was introduced in Gen 3 or later, it could have very easily just been a pure grass type with the Levitate ability, because it doesn't really take advantage of its flying type very often, and in some ways it hinders it, such as giving it an added weakness to ice and various other types like that. But it's somewhat unique in that regard, so I don't have a problem with that. As for what it's based on, it's more of just a generic plant monster than really anything specific. The Hoppip family is representative of the stages of life of a dandelion, but Hoppip itself doesn't really look like one all that much. The leaves coming out of its head do sort of look like the leaves on a dandelion, but that's not really anything super unique to it. It's just kind of generic plant leaves. And like I said, you don't really notice too much of its dandelion aspect until it evolves. So this one's just kind of a generic cat face looking bulb thing with leaves that floats. And in the 3D games where it like has animation, the leaves on the head rotate like a helicopter, which biologically does not make any sense whatsoever, but whatever, we can deal with that. So its name is basically just a It's basically just hop, because its evolutions also work with that, with the hop, skip, jump, like, I don't know what you'd call that, just sort of an ongoing trend with the name. And Pip could refer to a type of seed. I never really thought of it as that, but I suppose that works. And its Japanese name is Haneko, which is a combination of Ha, which means leaf, Haneru, which means to jump or hop, or possibly Hane for wing, or Neko for root. I mean, Neko also means cat, but I don't know if that's what they were going for with that one. Mainly, I just remember Hoppip as when it was first leaked in the US. Like, Japan already knew what it was, because Gold and Silver had been out by the time, but coverage over the internet was scarce at the time, because it was the early days of the internet. And I just remember when I first saw these three, I assumed they were all grass types, just because that's what they looked like. And a few other people apparently thought that Hoppip was fire type and Jumpluff was water type, just based on their coloration. But no, they were just going for a different color scheme on these, which, if you want to go for visual variety, I'm fine with that. And that's about it. Hoppip is not really known as being one of the more useful in-game Pokemon, unfortunately. It starts with Splash, which just gives it a bad reputation from the get-go. And it does get some decent moves down the line, but mostly status-inflicting things. It does get Mega Drain, but not really much else in terms of attacks. So it may have its use in the competitive scene, if you're just going for something to inflict status and that kind of thing. But in-game, you could probably go for something better. Caterpie is the first Bug-type Pokemon in National Dex order, and is very likely to be the first Bug-type that you encounter, depending on what version you're playing. In Blue version, it is fairly common in Viridian Forest and the surrounding routes, whereas in Red, it's rare. It is the only Bug-type that you'll find in Yellow in that area, and it is also available in early game in Silver, but not in Gold, and can be found equally as common as Weedle and Crystal. In later games, they two continue to be counterparts in most cases, and if you're going to find a Caterpie, it's usually at the beginning of the game. And that's for a very good reason, because Caterpie also introduced the concept of the early Bug type. Not every generation has one of these, but most do. And the early Bug type is usually one of the worst Pokemon in the game until it evolves. And even when it does evolve, it, in many cases, is not all that impressive anyway, unless you're just in the early game, and then you'll eventually end up replacing it with something later on, unless you really want to stick with it. When you get a Caterpie, its only moves are String Shot and Tackle. Tackle, of course, being available on like practically every single Pokemon. It doesn't get any stab from it, so basically you want to try and evolve this thing as quickly as possible when you get it, and it's going to be a little bit of a grind until it does, because even though it evolves early, you're not going to be doing a whole lot of damage with it. Caterpie always sticks out in my mind as being, even though I had Blue as a kid, I always thought that if you had Red, trying to raise one up into a Butterfree before Brock was always going to be a bit of a pain, just because in Gen 1, Weedle's Poison Sting would actually be super effective against Caterpie, and Weedle was the most common thing you'd encounter in Viridian Forest, so the majority of your encounters would be up against things that could beat it quite easily. So if you wanted a Butterfree, you had to go through quite a bit of trouble. But as for its design, obviously it's a caterpillar, but it's based specifically on the what is it called? The Spice Bush Swallowtail. It is basically completely identical to one. It has the same coloration, same body shape, same markings on its head, and although Caterpie seems to always have the red horn thing coming out of it, the Swallowtail caterpillar doesn't always have that, but it can actually grow one out of its head as sort of a defense mechanism, because the caterpillar already looks fairly like a snake, and that makes it look like a snake's tongue, and it also gives off an unpleasant odor to basically ward off predators. So Caterpie is basically just unchanged from the real animal in terms of design. It's kind of interesting. I never knew that as a kid. The name is basically just Caterpillar, but shortened and made cuter. I don't think the P ending really means anything in particular. It's just, yeah. And the Japanese name is actually the exact same thing, so there you go. That's Caterpie. Weedle is the second early game bug type of Gen 1, and by the time I'm recording this, I've already talked about Caterpie, so hopefully I've already said that one first. If not, then oh well, you'll just be hearing these out of order, not a big deal. It is slightly more useful than Caterpie in terms of dealing damage in early game, but only a little bit, because it has Poison Sting over Tackle, which means that it gets stabbed, which is at least slightly helpful. It can be super effective against certain things. In Gen 1, it would have been good against other bug types. And, of course, it can also poison the target, which is just good to have, but obviously not something you're going to want to have on your team for too long. You'll want to try to evolve this thing as quickly as possible, and even in its final form, it's not all that spectacular, but we'll talk about that later on. Its distribution is also basically the same or opposite as Caterpie's. It's common in red and silver, whereas Caterpie was common in blue and gold. It's not in yellow at all, and most other games that have one will have the other. Not always, but usually. As for its design, this one is basically a larval wasp, whereas Caterpie was a caterpillar. This one looks like a caterpillar, but isn't one, and that kind of threw me off as a kid because obviously I knew that Caterpillar would metamorphosize into a butterfly or a wasp, and they went with that idea for early Pokemon because it's something that children would be able to understand. They wanted to introduce something basic like that before they got into more complex evolutions later on. This one became a bee, or a hornet, or a wasp, or whatever we want to call it. It's kind of a combination of all three. And I never really thought of bees having a lower evolution, so to speak, but they do, because they're born as basically maggots. Lots of insects are, it's just not something you really see that often because they're not marketable, and so you're not gonna have, like, kids' books about the very hungry maggot. But, it's biologically accurate, and I'll give them points for that one. The name is just a combination of worm and needle, or possibly just weed and needle, although I'm not really sure what it has to do with weeds other than it might eat them. Could also be based off of weevil, which is another sort of insect, but it's not really related to this kind. But interestingly, its Japanese name is Beetle, Beedle. And that's actually a much better name for it, because it evolves into a bee. So I'm not really sure why they changed it. I feel like the original one made more sense. It's also worth noting that Weedle and its evolutions have sort of a beta version that has been officially released by Game Freak, and so I'll throw in this picture of Weedle's early design, which was apparently called Kokana. It looks like it has a little hat. I'm not really sure what that is. It's kind of adorable, though. Spearow is the other normal flying early game bird from Gen 1. There's actually a couple other normal flying types from Gen 1, but Spearow is specifically found at the beginning of the game. It's not on Route 1, and you do have to go very slightly out of your way to get one. Basically, you just find one to the left of Viridian City if you bother going over there, and then you'll find them on, I believe, Route 4 and various places later on. It's basically just kind of a better version of Pidgey in most respects that is slightly rarer. And so I have to imagine they put it in the game as basically just a way of, like, if you want to use a flying type and you look if you look around slightly more than not at all, then you might encounter this one and use it instead, and therefore get a little bit of a, added bonus because it's better. I don't know if they specifically designed it to be better, but that's just kind of how it turned out. Whereas Pidgey starts with Gust, which is a normal type move in Gen 1, and takes quite a while to actually get any stab moves. Spearow starts out with Peck, which is not great, but it's something, and then it gets Drill Peck later on down the line. Plus, it just kind of has the better stats to work with it, and it evolves faster than Pidgey does. So, well, technically, Pidgey evolves faster, but Spearow reaches its final evolution faster, so it's just, in most respects, it's better. There's really not much else I can say about that, which is not to say that it's great, like, on its own, but I've used it a few times, and it works for what it is. So, much like Pidgey, it's just sort of vaguely a bird. The name would indicate that it's a sparrow. It doesn't really look like one. Bulbapedia says that it might be based off of a shrike, or just sort of a generic bird of prey. As far as I'm concerned, it basically is just another bird. Whenever somebody complains that in later generations they're just recycling the same Pokemon concepts over and over, and like they shouldn't do a new bird every time and a new rodent and all that stuff, you can pretty much just point at Gen 1 and be like, hey, they made 2 basic, like, brown birds available at the very start of the game. They didn't have to do that, they just did it to kind of make a little bit more biodiversity rather than just having one small bird, which is fine with me. Its Japanese name is Oni Suzume. Oni is demon, and Suzume is sparrow, so it's literally just demon sparrow. And as I said, its English name, fairly obviously, is just sparrow, but also with spear thrown in there. It doesn't really have anything to do with spears. Its evolution has a long beak, kind of like a spear, but this one doesn't. So, I don't know, it's always kind of been the more aggressive Pidgey, and it kind of got that reputation from the anime also, where it attacked Ash and Pikachu in the first episode, and that's kind of just what it's most notable for. So overall, I don't dislike it. It's fairly generic, but if I had to go with an early route bird, Spearow would be one of my first choices, probably. Spinarak is another bug poison early route bug type, similar to Weedle, but it's actually not all that similar to Weedle in most other ways. Weedle and Caterpie were definitely parallels in that they're both basically caterpillars, have a cocoon stage, and then have a final stage. They evolve at the same levels and all that. Spinarak does have a counterpart in Ladybug, which we'll be seeing later, but those, like, their 2 families are not as similar as the Weedle and Caterpie ones, and they don't fill exactly the same role. For instance, one of the major differences is that Spinarak is actually somewhat usable, whereas Caterpie and Weedle really weren't. It does actually learn some level up moves, and it can be taught TMs if you want to do that. And it is designed to kind of last a little bit longer than the ones from Gen 1. It's, like I said, it was a counterpart with Ladybug, and unlike Caterpie Weedle, who were both in both versions, these are actually version exclusives. Spinarak was only in gold, Ladybug was only in silver, and they also appeared at different times of the day, Spinarak only appearing at night. And a kind of unusual thing about it is its original gold-silver sprites were purple instead of green. I've seen it claimed in a few places this might have been because it was meant to basically appear like it was in darkness, since you would only find it at night. It's probably not the case, because they didn't really do that with any other Pokemon, and there were other ones that they messed up the colors with, so it was probably just a last-minute change where they kept the sprite the original color and then changed the artwork, because there were a few other Pokemon they did that with. The name is fairly simplistic. It's a combination of spinneret, which is the part of a spider where a web comes out, and arachnid. The Japanese name is Itomaru. Ito means thread and Maru means circle. I am not really sure where the circle's coming into play. It is sort of round, and I mean, I guess a spider web is circular, but I'm not sure if that's the reason why they called it that. And other than just generically being a spider, it is based somewhat off of the Happy Face spider, which, much like Spinarak, has sort of a face marking on its backside. Not as pronounced as in this one, obviously, because Pokemon do like to take traits like that and exaggerate them, but it is there. There is also a type of spider that can actually spit web from its mouth that this one is not particularly based on, but Spinnerack can do that, so it's sort of based on that in a sense. It's just called the spitting spider as far as I can tell. I don't know if it has a different name. But, yeah, that's pretty much Spinnerack. I feel like it probably would have actually been better if it had kept the purple coloration. Makes a little bit more sense for it, but I have no problem with green. I like green. And people do seem to complain occasionally about it only having 6 legs, but there's a lot of bug Pokemon that don't have the correct number of legs, so I'm not really sure why Spinnerack gets as much crap as it does. Bellsprout is one of several grass poison types introduced in Gen 1. I never really understood why there had to be 3 separate families of that. Bulbasaur in particular never seemed particularly poisonous to me. As far as Bellsprout goes, though, it is somewhat fitting because its real-world basis is the pitcher plant, which is a carnivorous flower. Basically, it has a wide open, I'm not sure what the term for it would be, like, it's basically just the bell shape. It has like a big open thing like that attracts insects with a sweet smell, and then they'll slip into it and basically get trapped and digested by the flower, which really is kind of horrifying when you think about it. I always felt that the food chain should have a natural order to it, and insects are basically on the bottom of that list unless you count plants. And when you have stuff going out of order like that, it just always seems kind of unusual and cruel, but that's just me. But yeah, pitcher plants are lesser known than the Venus flytrap, which is the most commonly known carnivorous plant, but we didn't get a Venus flytrap until Gen 4. So this one possibly introduced people to a type of plant that they were not aware of. Its name is pretty basic, just bell and sprout. There is a kind of plant called the bellflower, but Bellsprout isn't really based off of that. It kind of can look like one, or just a generic flower like a daisy or something. But it's basically just a pitcher plant with rudimentary legs made out of its roots. I always thought it was a nice, simple design. It's easy to draw. If I ever got bored at school and was doodling Pokemon, Bellsprout was usually going to be one of them, just because it is made of a lot of simple shapes. Its counterpart, in some senses, is Oddish and its family. They're not exact counterparts because Oddish eventually did get a split evolution and Bellsprout didn't, and they're not always like opposite version exclusives or anything, but they have a number of similarities. They were opposite version exclusives in Red and Blue, Bellsprout being the one available in Blue, and although I do like the Oddish family better in some ways, I would probably consider Bellsprout the superior for in-game use, because it has access to Vine Whip early on, whereas Oddish only has Absorb, which is a weaker move. I don't know, I just always felt like Bellsprout was a little bit better. Its Japanese name is Madat Tsubomi, which basically translates to still a flower bud. I didn't know its Japanese name until looking it up just now, but I find that interesting because Tsubomi is actually Budu's Japanese name, and I went and checked that one up, and it's basically just literally flower bud. So, kind of interesting, several generations later they went with a more simplified version of this name. I'm not sure why with this one they're referring to it as being still a flower bud, as if it has already gone through a change from a previous form that was a flower bud already, but I don't know, I'm not going to question it. Hoot Hoot is our early route normal flying type for Gen 2, and I've got to say it is a hell of a lot more interesting than Pidgey. In terms of battle prowess, it's not a whole lot better. It's even arguable if it is better. But in terms of actual design, it's definitely a lot more inspired than just a generic bird. Again, I don't hate Pidgey, but Hoot Hoot definitely beats it out in that department. So obviously it's an owl. It's the one that it resembles the closest is apparently the eagle owl, but it also has a lot of weird stylistic choices going on. Like the frame around its eyes resemble the hands of a clock. It also has these like downward pointing markings that sort of look like gears. I don't know if that was their intent. but it has a number of mannerisms, such as always standing on one foot. It does have 2 feet, but it basically switches between them, and the second one sort of recedes into its body. It also can kind of like rock back and forth like a metronome, so it's clearly meant to be based off of a clock in some capacity. I guess just because it comes out at night, and it's sort of meant to represent the fact that, maybe not represent, but it's Gen 2 was the first game, like the first set of games to have an internal clock, and so this is a Pokemon that only comes out at night, and so it's just sort of representing the concept of time in general. But I don't know, I just think it's a cool design. It works out fairly well. It's definitely a lot more interesting looking than its evolution, but again, we'll get to that later when we encounter that one. But yeah, overall, I approve of Hoot Hoot. Its name is a little bit, like, leaves a little bit to be desired. Obviously, it's just Hoot, sound an owl makes. I'm not sure why it's being repeated. I mean, you could claim that it has something to do with the clock, like tick-tock, Hoot Hoot, I don't know, but it works. It's better than just calling it Hoot. Its Japanese name is Ho-Ho, which is sort of like with Pidgey being Popo, just sort of their take on what an owl sounds like. And basically every translation there, like from there on, has either just been Hoot Hoot directly or something very similar to it. I've seen an early promotional material that Hoot Hoot, like before Gold and Silver actually came out. I sometimes saw its name spelled with a hyphen in between, or with the second H being capitalized. That was eventually dropped to just be one long word with only a capital at the beginning. Doesn't really matter, but it's just kind of one of those things I remember. Much like the, I kind of associate that with, there was like a toy that came in a box of cereal that was basically like a spinning Hoot Hoot top. You would kind of like wind it up on the, like on the bottom, and then it would spin. I don't know why I'm mentioning this, I just remember it. But yeah, as far as early game Pokemon go, you could do a lot worse. It's not going to be single-handedly winning battles just on its own of it, but it has like access to Hypnosis and various other useful moves like that, so if you want to try one out and haven't done it before, I mean, you might be surprised. It's somewhat decent. Poliwag is a water type like many others. It's certainly not a type exactly short in Pokemon numbers, but Poliwag does manage to stand out in a few different ways. For one thing, it is one of a surprisingly low number of water types that's part of a 3-stage family. Not counting starters, it was the only one in Gen 1 and Gen 2. It took a while for there to be any more. And it's one of the water types that can actually be encountered out of water in certain areas. I believe in Gen 1 you could only get it through fishing, but later on you can start finding it in the grass, as I did in this particular encounter. Which is always nice, just because it gives you an option to catch one without having to wait until you get a fishing rod. Other than that, though, it kind of does what a lot of water types do. It mainly just learns moves of its own type. It does have access to Hypnosis, though, as one of its main gimmicks is related to the swirl on its belly. It basically just uses that to hypnotize stuff. I don't know if there's any real scientific basis behind the whole stare into the swirl to fall asleep thing, but that's always been a stereotype with hypnotists and whatnot. And in this case, it's not completely arbitrary, because tadpoles sometimes do actually have like very clear skin, and you can actually see their innards through it. And if you look at one from the bottom, there's like you can see the intestines kind of coiled up, and it looks like a spiral. And that's what Poliwag is based on. I don't think all tadpoles look like that, but some of them do. It's allegedly the favorite Pokemon of Satoshi Tajiri, the main creator of the series. His favorite might have changed over the years, but it was at least his favorite at one point. And if it's anything like my appreciation for certain Pokemon, it's probably just based on the fact that it's fairly simplistic and easy to draw. A lot of my favorites end up being that way, just kind of stuff that I can doodle easily. The name is just basically a play on Poliwag, which is another term for tadpole, one that I specifically remember learning from the Nick Jr. show, Gullah Gullah Island. I don't know if that term is really used anymore. And the wag could just be referring to its tail, according to Bulbapedia, but I mean, I don't know, it's probably just them taking a word and changing one letter. They do that sometimes. And the Japanese name is Nyoromo, which is apparently a combination of Nyoranyoro, probably said that wrong, which is apparently the sound of slithering, and Kodomo, which means child. I'm not sure how Nyoranyoro sounds like slithering, but Japanese is weird, so whatever. Honestly, not too much else to say about Poliwag. Its evolutions have a little bit more, like, worthiness to... I don't know where I'm going with this. Like, a few more things to say about them, but this one's always just kind of been the first stager. It was the inspiration behind Schmigenhigen, one of the strange creatures from Barker the Big Dip, if that counts for anything. But, that's about it for this one. It's just kind of an early game water type. It does its job decently, but it's not going to really stand out that much against the rest of the 4 million water types available. Zubat is, of course, one of the most notorious Pokemon for anybody who's played almost any generation, as it's known as basically being a pest that shows up in pretty much every single cave in the game, either it or its evolutions. And in Johto, it also has the distinction of appearing outside of caves at nighttime sometimes, since its appearance inside the caves apparently wasn't annoying enough. Despite its annoyance, Zubat is not a horrible Pokemon, though. It's often overlooked because of how common it is, but in terms of actual usefulness and just, honestly, its design in general, it actually has a fair amount going for it, surprisingly. It's basically just a bat in design, but it has no eyes whatsoever, which is basically a play on the fact that popular culture would have you believe that bats can't see at all, which isn't true. They can, it's just that a lot of times they do focus on echolocation more than regular eyesight just because they live in the dark. I'm not sure why it has no legs. It could just be because it's evolved to always hang off of ceilings and never have to like land on the ground for any reason, so it just attaches to the ceiling with its legs. Not really sure. It's kind of a weird design, though. I appreciate it for what it is. And in terms of use in-game, it does have access to Wing Attack fairly early on, which is a decent enough stab move. And it also gets Supersonic and Confuse Ray, as anybody who's encountered it in the wild is aware, because it likes to use that quite a bit when you encounter it, and because of its relatively high speed stat, unless you are significantly over-leveled compared to the wild Pokemon, when you encounter these, and especially Golbat, you have a high chance of not being able to run away from them, and then if you decide, rather than attempt to keep running away and constantly fail to and keep getting attacked by it, chances are it's already confused your Pokemon, and then when you decide to attack it, you're just going to hurt yourself in confusion, and that's kind of what leads to a lot of people hating it. So it's definitely deserved its reputation as being obnoxious, but that's just kind of its role. I feel like they did that on purpose, and if they did, then they definitely succeeded. So, not exactly something I like to encounter, but as far as Pokemon go, it could certainly be a lot worse. Again, the design, it's obviously just based off of a bat. There's not really any specific type of bat that it's based on, as far as I can tell. There's plenty of kinds to choose from. There's actually a lot more types of species of bats than most people would realize. But at least conceptually, it's based off the vampire bat because it sucks the blood or energy out of Pokemon and people, I think. Vampire bats aren't quite as aggressive as people would make you think they are, but they do drink blood, so fair enough. And the name is based off of the Japanese onomatopoeia Zubato, which basically means bullseye, or like just hitting something. And it's probably named that because of echolocation basically being used to hit a faraway object and bounce back in order to determine how far away it is. That, and it has a bat in the name anyway. So Japan does like to stick English words into their stuff a lot, and it just worked out fairly well. So it doesn't really mean a whole lot of anything in English, but it's a fairly decent Japanese pun, and they kept the same name when they translated it. Okay. That was a bit of a long stretch there. Let's see, I've caught 13, and only one was in the decks last time, so I guess that was 12 in a row. I'm going to assume that I didn't have to speed up the footage or add in any blackness there. I think I timed it fairly well. Good God. Okay, so let's actually get some live commentary in this one. I swear, most videos are not going to be that way. This one, they're just, like, the start of the game has a crap ton of things that you can catch, and I didn't even get everything. Not to dwell on that for too long, but just to kind of give an idea of my planning into that one. Pidgey, Sentret, and Hoppip are daytime exclusives on the first route. Hoppip has a 5% chance of appearing. I did not realize that at the time. I thought it was more common than that, because it actually showed up in the last video, I think, and in my, like, 5 minutes of scrapped footage for this one. It showed up before I found Rattata. But yeah, so I happened to find that on the next route, and then, Caterpie and Weedle are also daytime exclusives. Weedle's also a 5% encounter. I just happened to get really lucky with it. And then as soon as night hits, then that gives me access to Hoot Hoot, Spinarak, and Poliwag, and Zubat. I mean, I can get Zubat anyway from Dark Cave, but specifically on this route. I wasn't even going to catch it, but it frickin' showed up twice, so I figured why not. Oh god. So, I still have Geodude. I'll get that one when I go to Dark Cave. It's also on the route, is it 45, 46? The one that juts out of the starting one. And then there's some morning exclusives, and then there's still another Pokemon that appears here in the tower. Plus, I don't know, like, how much attention was actually paid to any of that footage. I assume that anybody who did sit through all that was kind of just listening and not so much watching for most of it, but to the left on route, I'm gonna say 36? I don't really know the numbers in this game that well. I think it's 36. There's actually a patch of grass that isn't there in Gold and Silver, and it lets you get some stuff early, like Growlithe. I'm so not bothering with that right now. I've caught enough things today. Plus, I was running out of money for Pokeballs. I could do the Ruins of Alph stuff, so I've still got options, but I'm gonna hold off on that a little bit. But yeah, so what else did I accomplish during all that? Fought a couple trainers, including the, oh god. I think we're about to have another 4 minutes. I'll throw it in after I finish this thought. I'll not interrupt myself. But yeah, Youngster Joey, fairly, what would the word be? Infamous, mostly from Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I added his number for no reason other than to see how often he would call me. I'll probably delete it later. And then I didn't expect him to actually call for a rematch, so I figured, hey, I'll go check that out. And his Pokemon did not gain a single level, as far as I can tell. I think it was level 4 in both battles. But, yeah, I did that, just kind of looked around town a bit. There was the teacher, Earl. I don't remember if he was in Gold and Silver or if he was added for this, because I know he got a lot more focus in Stadium 2. There's kind of some interesting battles with the Training Academy in Stadium 2 that kind of teach you a lot of game mechanics. I actually had a lot of fun going through that when I was a kid, because it kind of taught me a lot of stuff I didn't know, and it was just kind of generally useful. I kind of wish they'd do stuff like that more often, as like an optional area in the games, just kind of have like little mechanic teaching battles. Lord knows, since they've added so much stuff since Gen 2, they could certainly have several hours of content for that. Like, I don't even understand how the, whatchamacallit, the terrain moves from, X and Y onwards. Like, I have no idea what any of those do. Like, rain, sun, hail, sandstorm, I've got it. Grassy terrain, all that crap, I have no idea. I've never bothered using them, and I've never really seen any of a reason to learn. But, someday I might, I don't know. But yeah, there's a training academy, there was just, like I said, just kind of some stuff I looked at off screen. Guy wants to trade in Bellsprout for an Onyx. I'm not going to do that. I can just get an Onyx later. And now, of course, we got the Sprout Tower, which I don't think is mandatory. I don't remember. I think you can do the gym without doing this. But I'll want to do it anyway, just for the experiences, and because you get an HM and all that. And most of the people in here use pretty much nothing but Bellsprout, so it's going to be a bunch of repetitive battles. So now that that battle's over, let's go ahead and I guess do the Ghastly commentary, and then I will be back. Ghastly is a ghost poison type, and unlike most Pokemon, I actually have a fair amount to say about its type here, for a couple different reasons. First off, the ghost type in general is just kind of weird, because in later games it's definitely been expanded on a lot more, and there's a wide variety of ghost types to choose from, and a lot of them are pretty cool. Personally, it's my favorite type. It used to be grass. In Gen 1, Ghastly and its evolutions were the only ones available, and the ghost type in itself was honestly kind of useless, and I'm not really sure why they included it other than maybe just to round it up to an even 15. Same thing with Dragon. It is immune to normal and fighting moves, which is cool, but offensively it didn't really have much of a point because it was supposed to be good against Psychic, but it wasn't due to an oversight. And the only ghost-type move that was available in Gen 1 was Lick, which was really weak, and a couple moves that didn't have, like, set damage to them, so the fact that they were ghost-type really didn't have any point. But it's definitely been expanded upon later on, and now the type has a reason to exist. The poison type is a little bit stranger, because nothing about it really screams poison. Ghastly is supposed to be just made of gas, so you could claim that it's poisonous gas, but that's never really been a major part of its lore, or like any of its Pokedex entries or anything like that. So it was most likely just sort of included because poison was the default, like, spooky/evil type before dark type existed, and so a lot of things like this and Zubat were given poison just due to a lack of anything better to give it. If this family had been introduced later on, there's a good chance it would have been pure Ghost or just Ghost Dark. But because it was part poison, that confused a lot of people into thinking that Ghost was weak to Psychic, because the Ghastly family is weak to Psychic. And so it directly contradicted what the anime had to say when Ash went to fight Sabrina. And in Johto, they actually got it backwards by saying that Psychic was good against Ghost, even though they had fixed that by Gen 2, and it was just a mess all around. As for what it's based on, I mean, it's a ghost and it's gas. It's not based off of anything in real life, really, so you can't really pin down a specific basis for it. Bulbapedia says it might be based off of the Sogen B, don't know if I pronounced that right, which is apparently the decapitated head of a monk that is doomed to wander the earth. Maybe. I don't know anything about that, so I couldn't tell you. And its name is basically just the word Ghastly, but spelled differently, with emphasis on the gas, because it's made of gas. I gotta mention here, it is one of several Pokemon that I see spelled incorrectly way too often on the internet, because people just try to spell it as the word it's based on. So a lot of times when I see people refer to it, they'll spell it with the H, which it's not supposed to have. Same goes with spelling Onyx with a Y, Unknown with a K, and a lot of stuff like that. Just kind of annoying. And I think out of all the Pokemon I've covered so far, this one has by far the best Japanese name. It's just Gos. Not with a T at the end, just Gos. And it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. They took the word ghost, and they just took a letter off of it to make it sound slightly different. Good to know that not only the English names can be stupid like that. Alright, now that one's over with, let's go through a few more of the same battle over and over. I let Pillory faint because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, but I mean, it wasn't going to be really accomplishing that much in this area anyway, so that's fine. I suppose at some point I should probably, like, make a comment on the fact that this place exists at all. I don't really know what to say about it. I do think it is kind of interesting, though. It's, I guess kind of the first sign of this region being quite a bit different from Kanto in terms of like overall tone. Kanto was pretty generic because it was just the first one and it didn't really have any kind of gimmick to it. Looking back on it now, like if you had to say it had a gimmick, it would probably be slightly more industrious than, maybe not industrious, but like, I'm not really sure what to call it. Like, it has the power plant and, like, Celadon Mansion and all that. Or, not Celadon Mansion, Cinnabar Mansion. But, I mean, those aren't really much of anything to make note of. It does have a lot of, like, trainers with, like, whips and shit for some reason. I think the series was, like, meant to be darker in the beginning, but I don't know. This one's definitely more traditional Japanese, and, I can't say I really know anything about Japan, like, in depth, so other people will know more about this than I do, but I think this accurately represents, the region it's based on, because, Kanto, or I think it's actually pronounced Kanto, is, like, actually the name of the region in Japan that it's based off of that contains Tokyo and all that, and then this is the one just kind of like off to the side of it, and I don't know if the name of the area is Kansai, but I know that's what the accent is called. And I think this is where Kyoto is, which is sort of the more, like, I guess just traditional really is the best way to put it. It's less industrial and overpopulated than Tokyo is, and the Pokémon region reflects that. I kind of like that. Johto doesn't have, like, that much of an identity to it in terms of, like, Sinnoh is the cold one, Hoenn is the tropical one. Like, this one's just kind of, like, the one that isn't exactly Kanto, but is similar. But it's got some cool Japanese-type stuff going on in it, and, I have to imagine if you grew up in the culture, you'd probably appreciate it a bit more, but, I don't know, I always thought it was pretty neat. So, will Basil be able to solo this guy, or will I have to go back and heal? That's the question here. So I really don't want to have to, do that. That seems a bit excessive. I'm pretty sure this guy has a Hoot Hoot. That could be a problem. If I have to heal, I'll just off-screen it, but let's see. Bellsprout's not going to do dick for damage here. At level 7, I'm pretty sure it doesn't have acid or anything like that, so it's just going to be using Vine Whip, which I resist. How much damage is that going to do? Yeah, only 2. I think Vine Whip has a higher crit rate. I don't remember. I know Razor Leaf does. I want to say Vine Whip also does, but I could be wrong. Either way, I should probably heal after this thing gets down low enough so I don't immediately get destroyed by the Hoot Hoot, and its devastating peck move. That'll be very threatening. But yeah, I think it's a decent idea to have an area like this at the beginning of the game before the first gym, just to kind of give you an excuse to grind up a bit. I guess you could argue that Gen 1 had Viridian Forest. I don't know if that really counts, though. It's more just a route that has a different name. Also, he didn't use the Hoot Hoot. That was weird. I guess he saves it for the last. Interesting bit of comparison here, though, is And by interesting, I mean by, like, 1999 standards, because this was knowledge, like, before the games even came out in English. In the original games, picking Charmander was kind of like the difficult mode of the three. Not by a whole lot, because, I mean, you could get through Brock just with brute strength anyway, but it was the one of the three that was not effective against Brock, at least. And in this game, if you pick the Fire Starter, you'll have basically no problem getting through all the Bellsprout here. Not that you'll have Ember for a while, but, I mean, you'll get it if you train up Cyndaquil a lot and don't really bother with anything else. And so the Water Starter is actually the worst of the three to go with, because they all have Stab, Vine Whip, and that is going to be a problem. So I guess it forces you to sort of pick up something else early on and not solo with the starter. Unless you're stubborn and just raise it up to an ungodly level and just tank the Vine Whips anyway, but I don't know who wants to do that. Speedrunners, probably. You and your Pokemon will have no trouble using this move. Flash is weird. I don't understand. Like, for some reason, a bunch of grass types can learn Flash. I'm gonna assume Chikorita probably can. Yeah, so of the ones I have here, the one that can produce fire from its body can't learn Flash, but the fricking Walking Pear can. I don't get that. Also, I think I have an escape rope. Yes I do. I'm gonna hold on to it, though. Because I have a specific use for that in mind, and if you were looking at the footage earlier when I was talking for 25 straight days, then you might know what it is. But anyway. Since the vast majority of this video was me blabbering on in post over uninteresting footage, I'm going to let this one go a little bit longer and go ahead and clear out this gym. It's not exactly going to take a long time to get through, because it's 2 trainers and no puzzle. Let's see if we can maybe get a couple levels on Pillory here. That's still the worst nickname. Also, I must always, like, every time I see Violet City now, I immediately think of this weird video that Worster had, where he was trying to do a speedrun of this, and it was nighttime, went into a building, came out, it was suddenly day, went into a building and came out, and it was suddenly night again. Nobody really had an explanation for that, other than just some kind of, like, what would it be, like, replicable? I don't know if that's the word. Just basically a glitch that you'd never be able to get to happen again, kind of like the TikTok clock up warp. It was just a random, like, space particle hitting the game in such a way and turning a 1 into a 0 or something. Also, am I seriously gonna wow! Can't even beat the Spearow, okay. We'll have to try and get Pillory some extra levels here, because it's fallen behind, and that is not going to do it any favors in later battles if I can't even beat a single thing to get some experience on it. Also, can Tackle miss a few more times? Like, I feel like half the battles I've done today, Tackle has missed at least once. It's what, 95 accuracy? Like, yeah, that's 1 out of 20, but jeez. Let's go back and heal for no reason. So why is Falconer's Gym just a $sign? It's one of life's great mysteries. Like, I can understand maybe not giving it a complex puzzle because it's the first gym. So they just kind of didn't give it a puzzle at all, but why the $sign? At least in the remakes, they made it so it was like a high elevated platform because, you know, birds. I guess maybe they just wanted a layout that forced you to battle people. Training here night and day, and that's why none of us have passed, like, level 10. I also like how the bird keepers are holding cages like that. It's like... if these were normal birds... Okay, actually, let's try out Rage after this move. Let's see if that's any better. I know Rage starts out weaker, but once you start taking damage, it gets stronger. But yeah, it's like... I imagine, like, your Pidgey and stuff is gonna have no problem just kind of, like, perching on your shoulder or just kind of standing on the ground and following you. Like, why the need for the cage? Oh my god. Am I gonna get wrecked by a Pidgey? Is this actually gonna happen? Okay, we at least beat something. Now, if I can get a single hit on the next thing without dying, that would be nice, because then I don't have to immediately heal, at least. Yeah, Rage is significantly better in this than it is in fricking Gen 1, where you use the move once and you're locked into it until the heat death of the universe. But, it's still not an amazing move. I guess for early game it's okay. Also, I have no idea what that fricking noise is. I guess just one of the neighbors is running water and it's making an awful sound. Oh well. Okay, I don't know how this battle's gonna go. Falconer's not exactly difficult, but I'm also not really at a high level, so... I also probably should have used a potion, but whatever, we'll deal with it. So, Falconer has the personality trait of he really likes birds, and he's always talking about his dad and his dad's birds. And that's basically it. Alright, I think my game plan here is just kind of get through the Pidgey, because it's a Pidgey and it's not going to be much of a threat, and then... Oh, I didn't realize this one also had Mud Slap. I was gonna say, use Leer a couple times on the, second Pokemon, so that I can hopefully take it out faster, but, yeah, Mud Slap's already kind of posing a problem. Now, I don't know if Leer is guaranteed to hit. I want to say it probably isn't. Here, let's switch to you so you can probably die, and then I can at least get my accuracy back up. Oh my god, really? So yeah, like I said, not the, this is not the most difficult gym, but it's irritating enough just because Mud Slap is just an annoying move. I've seen it show up on, like, worst move ever lists a few times, and I really am not sure why. Because it's basically just a Sand Attack that can also do damage. So doesn't that mean that Sand Attack is already worse than it? And Flash is worse than Sand Attack because it has, like, 70 accuracy or some shit? So this is my plan, apparently. Use Leer a couple times, and then switch to my final Pokemon, which is weak to Gust. Sounds like a sound strategy. I guess I could use Reflect. That might be worth my while. Yeah. So that should make, those attacks do half damage, I believe. Or just the same amount, okay. Ugh. At least it's not spamming Mud Slap. I'm gonna assume I can probably take one more hit, and then Potion, and then finish it off. I was fully expecting that to be a critical because I spoke too soon, but luckily it was not. No, we'll just have Ghastly finish it off, that'll be fine. Ghastly is my first permanent team member, and you just didn't know it, and I didn't nickname it, and I have not used it yet. It's all part of my grand scheme. Ah, shit. Survive this, please. Okay. Surprisingly, Basil was the MVP of that battle. Out of the 2 Pokemon I used that went in with more than, like, 1 HP left. Because, I'm gonna say that Pillory probably did not count. Now I, too, can annoy the hell out of the opponent with Mud Slap. Yeah, I mean, again, for an early game move, I think there's nothing wrong with Mud Slap. I don't know if I'm going to teach it to anything. Oh, right, this is a thing, I forgot. Well, I was going to head to the Pokemon Center anyway, so let's go get that, I suppose. But, yeah, we're definitely wrapping it up here. This video's gone on for freaking long enough. I was gonna say, in yellow, I would basically try to duplicate every single TM that I got that I planned on using on something, even if it wasn't that good of a TM. Like, I just kind of like having backups. This game, I could do that by doing the cloning glitch with the PC. It runs the risk of accidentally deleting it, though, if I don't do it right. And I've also heard that you can kind of, like, mess up the PC in general. If you don't turn it off at the right time, it can make, like, an entire box die for some reason. Don't know how true that is, but it's, concerning until I know for sure how that works. But yeah, I think I'm okay with passing on this move for now. It's not really gonna make the, biggest difference, I'm guessing. All 3 of them can learn it, though, which is surprising. So with the gym done, next time I guess we'll look in all, like, 2 square meters of Dark Cave that we have accessible. And probably Ruins of Elf, catch like 19 more things, have another year of post-commentary, and then move on to the next cave.
つまり赤と青がこんな風にものすごい速さで入れ替わっていたんですね。
I know there are 150 Pokémon out there, but is there really one more adorable than Pikachu? I don't think so.